As we work to care for ourselves and appreciate our own worth, we all deserve a touch of elegance or even luxury from time to time. Yet treating ourselves can often feel like an indulgence we should avoid. And that's why I was delighted to discover Quince, a brand that marries luxury with affordability. Quince just isn't a store, it's a gateway to high-quality essentials accessible to everyone. Quince offers an incredible range of high-quality items that won't break the bank. Imagine slipping into a 100% Mongolian cashmere sweater for just $50, or dressing up in washable silk tops and dresses. They also have organic cotton sweaters and even 14-karat gold jewelry. And the best part is that all items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. How do they do it? Well, Quince partners directly with top factories, eliminating costly middlemen, and passes those savings right back to us. Plus, they only work with factories that uphold safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices using premium materials. Give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Visit quince.com/bestofyou for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/bestofyou to enjoy free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/bestofyou. I've been incorporating Organifi into my daily routine to help manage stress and boost my energy, and it's made such a difference. We all need a little extra support to keep our bodies healthy and energized, especially when tackling daily stresses and nutritional gaps. And Organifi green juice is just perfect for this. It's packed with essential superfoods and a clinical dose of ashwagandha, which helps reduce stress and support healthy cortisol levels. And you can also try Organifi red juice, which offers a superfood punch that boosts your energy naturally without caffeine and with only 2 grams of sugar. It's so easy to use Organifi blends. You just mix them with water or your favorite beverage while on the go. And they don't compromise on taste. Organifi is dedicated to offering the best tasting superfood products on the market at a cost that works out to less than $3 a day. You can enjoy the benefits of high quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Are you ready to give your body the nutrition it craves? Visit www.organifi.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou for 20% off your entire order. That's ORGANIFI.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Alison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I am so thrilled you are here today for this incredibly powerful episode with someone I think many of you are probably already familiar with. My conversation today is with Adam Young. Adam is a gifted psychotherapist and now a brand new author. His new book is hitting the shelves this week. It's called Make Sense of Your Story: Why Engaging Your Past with Kindness Changes Everything. And for those of you who may not know him yet, Adam has profoundly impacted the field of trauma and recovery with his insightful approaches to therapy. His podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves, has been a huge resource for so many people in understanding the narratives of their lives and the psychological underpinnings behind them. And Adam's work, especially this new book, which we talk about today, invites all of us to do the work of digging into the narratives that shape us. What's so compelling about Adam's approach is his transparency in sharing his own journey, exploring his early family dynamics and how these dynamics have influenced his adult life. And he shares so honestly about some of this on the podcast today. And his invitation to exploring our stories is never about casting blame, but instead about naming. It's something we talk about a lot on the podcast. We have to name things in order to brave a path to healing and to freedom and to healthier, more deeply connected lives. Adam discusses the crucial role of examining our formative relationships and their lasting impact, and he shares personal stories about his own discoveries and some of the painful realizations he had about his own family of origin and how these revelations have reshaped his understanding of himself. And honestly, it's so rare to find someone who's willing to open up so personally about his own story in a way that both educates and heals. I am thrilled to bring you my conversation with Adam Young. Adam, I am so thrilled to have you here today. We have sort of known of each other and been aware of each other and followed each other for a long time, but it's finally, here we are. I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for your generosity in inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, really just want to dive into this beautiful new book. Is this your first book, Adam?
First book.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It got me thinking about my own story. The title of it is Make Sense of Your Story. One of the things I love about what you do in this book, you know, like all good teachers, is you show us, you take us into some of your own exploration of your own story. So I'd love to start there if you're okay with it. One of the invitations in the book, there are many, but one of them is to talk about the importance of exploring our early family dynamics. And I want to get into that because it's not to blame, it's not to shame, it's to understand ourselves. And you talk about a specific dynamic in your own family of origin that over time, as you untangled the knots of it, revealed some things about yourself. Can you take us back a little bit and share with our listeners about what you uncovered about your own family dynamics and that part of your story?
Sure. When I was 35 years old, I would have said that I didn't have a story. I would have said I had a normal upbringing. Nothing really traumatic happened to me. I just don't have much to report. That would have been my answer if you had asked me to tell you about my story. But beginning in my mid-30s, I began to explore the nature of my relationship with my mother and my father during my growing up years. And the way I had made sense of my relationship with my parents as a 35-year-old was God gave me my sweet, tender mother to compensate for an often violent and emotionally distant father. And so in my mind, the connectedness and the sweetness that I felt in my relationship with my mom was kind of like buoyed up my heart because it was often bludgeoned by the violence of my father. The dilemma with that, it's not that it's untrue. It's just not the full truth. And what I came to explore and to understand was that I was what's called triangulated by my mother, which is just a fancy word for saying that my mother, from a very young age in my heart, trained me, groomed me, and used me like an adult, like a surrogate spouse, because my father, her husband, was checked out emotionally from the marriage. And so I came out of the womb, I became a very sensitive, tender boy, full of wonder and extremely attuned to the insides of my mother. And in time, that became sexualized, it became eroticized by my mother. And what I came to realize, and it took years to explore this, but what I eventually came to name was that my mother used me as a surrogate spouse because her husband, my father, was absent.
There's so much in this. The first part is there is a story.
Mm-hmm.
There was a story until you were 35. So we have to understand we do create stories out of our families of origin. And there was truth in it, small t truth. There were truth pieces in it. Your dad was distant. You've experienced your mother as loving and close, right? But it wasn't the full story. And it's important because in the initial version of the story, there's a hero and a villain.
That's right.
And as you begin to untangle the knots of that, as that first story sort of crumbled, I would imagine, Adam, that had to be a little bit anxiety producing to let go of that first story.
Yeah, it wasn't merely anxiety producing. It was disorienting. It was as if the foundation of my life had been pulled out from under me and I was kind of falling through the earth. And it's because my compass was whacked. My compass as a 35-year-old was mom is true north. She's this sweet, tender, in my dad's words, Lamb of God. That was the word he used to describe her. She could do no wrong. And my dad was violent, traumatized from the Vietnam War. And so my dad was kind of due south. And what I came to realize was, oh no, Adam, your compass is not oriented to the fullness of the truth of your story. There is a wickedness and a darkness in your mother that is masquerading as an angel of light, to use a Pauline term. And it was hard to name that and deeply disorienting.
My guess is there was an impetus at 35 for you needing to name that. Are you comfortable sharing that with us?
I had so many symptoms, okay? I had problems with anger. I had problems with anxiety, like deep, debilitating anxiety. Couldn't get out of bed in the morning anxiety. I would have immense experiences of fear, trepidation, shame, overwhelming shame, particularly in my close relationships like marriage and parenting. And I didn't know how to understand these symptoms. And more importantly, I couldn't find relief from them. I didn't know what was going on, why I was feeling these things in my body. And what began the process of healing for me was somebody gave me a book called The Wounded Heart by Dan Allender. And that was my introduction to the idea that I had a story from my growing up years that was deeply related to the symptoms I was experiencing in my adult life.
Were you a therapist at the time?
No. Oh, no.
Okay. Got it. So this was sort of an opening to this whole idea that you'd been shaped by these forces and the story that you'd been told. As you went through this disorientation, how did you cope? Did you seek out therapy at the time?
Yes, I sought out therapy. I went to what's called Recovery Week, which is a week-long program for men or women that have been sexually abused with Dan Allender out in Seattle. And look, I had no category that I had been sexually abused. I would not have said that I was sexually abused. Why did I go to a recovery week for sexually abused men? I can't tell you, except I wanted to be with the man who wrote the book that described the landscape of my heart better than anything I had read. So I read The Wounded Heart and I'm like, okay, the author of this book understands something about what it's like for me on the inside. And so I flew out to be with him, and he was the first, well, someone in my group was the first person to name that my relationship with my mother was not what I thought it was.
And you talk in the book about how we have these sort of fragments of memories, these scraps of memories. And I find this to be so powerful. I do a lot of IFS work. And in the work that I do, there's often this just memory that in general is like, why is that important to me? Why do I care about that? I tell a story in Boundaries for Your Soul about not making a basketball team. And I was like, why is this an important memory? I minimized that for years. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Until suddenly you go to the root of the memory and you're like, it's there for a reason. It's lit up in my mind for a reason, right? It's there for a reason. And so in your story, there were these snapshots of times with your mom where there was impropriety that were there. The memories were there, but you'd minimize them or rationalize them or bypass them. And you tell them in the book. Tell us a little bit about one or two of those that you began to go, oh, there's a reason.
Sure. Well, every day when I would come home from school and walk in the door, the first thought I had was, do I need to tend to my mother? Does my mother need a hug? Does my mother need conversation? Does my mother need engagement? In other words, I was always taking the temperature of my mom's insides. And then I was automatically, based on what we can say is implicit memory, responding to my mother's need. And it was automatic and unconscious. And so I didn't think it was a story at all. It's just the water that I swam in as a boy. It was just normal for me. It was not until other people spoke into that story with their perspective that I began to tilt my head and go, you mean you didn't do that with your mom? And they would be like, no, I didn't ever do that with my mom. And so then I was like, oh, maybe there's something about this story that I'm not telling truthfully to myself.
Yeah, it starts to crack that veneer. So, Adam, I'm curious about this word triangulation. You talk about it a lot. I talk about it as well. My experience with it was a little bit different. And I really want to have this conversation with you because I actually think it's common in different forms in family dynamics. You describe it primarily as being triangulated, where your mom leaned on you emotionally, essentially made you her surrogate spouse. And instead of working through her stuff with your dad, she brings you in as that third person, right?
You're saying it right.
So I'm reading your book going, oh my gosh, there's so many ways this can happen. And again, not to lay blame. In many ways, people are doing the best they can, but to name. And I love, Adam, you're such a truth teller. Like, we're going to name this. And you don't mince words. It's like we have to name what's really happening. Tell me a little bit about what is happening in the person who is put in that middle position, who's put in that role they were never supposed to be in. Why is that so devastating to our psyches?
Yes, two reasons. And I'll just speak out of my story, at least to begin with, and then you can ask follow-up questions. The two dynamics of triangulation that the chosen child is burdened with is, number one, they are consumed, usually, and in my case, by the opposite sex parent, but it doesn't have to be the opposite sex parent. They are consumed by one parent. What do I mean? Eaten. My goodness, my tenderness, my sensitivity was used by my mother to meet her emotional needs. Are her emotional needs valid? Absolutely. But they are designed to be taken to another adult, not to a child. Dynamic number two, as a result, there's a closeness, a connectedness between me and my mother that everyone in our family knew. I have twin brothers. If you interviewed them, they would say Mom and Adam were the two closest people in our family, besides the twins. The twins were probably closer to each other. But Mom and Adam, that puts me at enmity with my father. And it's not my fault, but my father was understandably envious that his wife preferred a child to him as a confidant, companion, lover.
That word consumption is such a powerful word. You're consumed for the purpose of the other person. And there is a power differential. The adult has the power. You have no way. You are innocent. You have no way of understanding. This is supposed to be the reverse. When you come home from school, all of those things that were going through your mind are what should be going through a parent's mind. How can I be there for my child? What does he need? It's such a mind insert expletive.
It is. It is madness for the chosen child. Because here's the madness. There is a specialness that I understandably felt and a power. And it's not a good power, but it is a power. And as children of a powerful God, we are designed to feel a sense of our own power. The dilemma is it's not to be in this particular way. I was not supposed to be the golden child who could come through for my adult mother. I was supposed to be 5. I was supposed to be 11. I was supposed to be 15, i.e. needy and childlike. And I'm not using the term needy pejoratively. I bless the neediness of that. Children are needy, but when you're serving another adult on par with them, like as an adult, you can't be needy because you can't be a child when you're functioning as an adult.
When you use that phrase, the chosen one, and the power, because I have power in my family that in some ways can feel good.
Yes.
And it's toxic in so many ways. It's power I'm not supposed to have. So figuring out how to give that power back to where the power belongs is so challenging for children who are chosen in that sense, the golden child. They are the ones. And it's so fascinating to me, Adam. How did you then work through as a healer, as someone who has natural gifts? Because some of this was your mom picked up on natural gifts in you. And instead of helping you steward those gifts, she exploited those gifts. How do you go on? And I'm thinking of the listeners, high sensitivity, high empathy, intuitive about other people, deeply kind, and a parent or a sibling or whomever exploits those gifts. How do you learn how to steward those gifts in a healthy way? I know that's a huge question.
It's a brilliant question, and it's a necessary question for healing. And I'll say the one-word answer, and then I'll expound on it. The one-word answer is blessing. What does blessing mean? Blessing is naming the goodness, the gloriousness, the godliness of that 10-year-old boy who could attune to an adult woman, who could adjust, who could adapt, who could tend to her, and with his God-given sensitivity, who loved her. There has to be a blessing of the goodness of that boy's heart. And at the same time, there has to be a grieving of how that goodness was exploited and used. Both blessing and grieving have to be there for healing to occur in the brain.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you ever really thought about who's in your support system and how they've helped shape who you are? I remember when I first started thinking about this, who are the people I would call, not just in an emergency, but when I'm having a tough week or I really need some help seeing the bigger picture. It's not always easy to ask for help, but once you realize who those people are who are in your corner, it can really change everything. In a world that often celebrates going at it alone, it's crucial to remember that having a support system is key, and therapy can offer that support that you need in many areas of your life. It's not just about tackling major trauma, but it's also about empowering you to be your best self through learning coping skills, through setting healthy boundaries, through getting another person's perspective on your situation, and so much more. When it comes to therapy, BetterHelp makes it accessible and convenient. It's fully online, serving over 5 million people globally with a diverse network of over 30,000 therapists. And if you feel like switching therapists, you can do so at any time without an extra charge, ensuring you find the right fit for your needs. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/bestofyou today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/bestofyou. In my years of being a therapist, one of the lessons I've learned is that not everybody benefits from a traditional 50-minute hour or even from typical weekly counseling sessions. This is why some people can go to couples counseling for months or even years and never really get anywhere or make any progress. This is why I'm such a believer in the intensive counseling process at Restoring the Soul in Colorado. Restoring the Soul was created by Michael Cusick to help couples or individuals experience deep change in half-day blocks over 1 or 2 weeks. Michael and his extraordinary team of therapists know that sometimes you just can't wait months or years to get to the bottom of an issue or to experience a needed breakthrough. For over 20 years, Restoring the Soul has helped couples and individuals transform their relationships and their lives. So if you're looking to get out of the rut you're in but can't wait months or years, contact Restoring the Soul today at www.restoringthesoul.com and learn how their intensive counseling process can jumpstart your journey or launch you to the place you want to be. And as a special gift just for the Best of You podcast listeners, make sure to visit www.restoringthesoul.com/bestofyou to download their PDF called 5 Ways Unresolved Trauma May Be Derailing Your Relationship. That's www.restoringthesoul.com/bestofyou. I want to bring this to this beautiful book you've written, this invitation, because the first step of that is you have to tell the truth.
That's right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to tell the truth of the reality of your story. Why is that hard for so many of us to do? What are these obstacles? Why are we fearful of looking at the truth of our stories?
Sure. It's a great question. I think there's a couple of answers to that. Number one, the truth is largely lacking in our world. According to Jesus, it's the truth that will set us free. The nature of being human is very often to idealize our parents, our upbringing, our growing up years. Why? It's not because we are deceitful per se. It's because we want Eden. We want it to be good. And so a 7-year-old boy, a 9-year-old girl does not have the mental capacity to lay down at night, put her head on her pillow at night and say, my alcoholic father or my sexually abusive stepfather is doing what he's doing with some measure of intentionality. A child's brain cannot confess that, if you will, acknowledge it. It's overwhelming to their nervous system. And so they make sense of it in other ways. And the biggest way we make sense of the dysfunction of our families is with some measure of self-contempt. It's a turning on the self, like the problem is me. And that's how our narrative becomes coherent for many of us well into our 30s, 40s, 50s, until we begin the hard but good labor of exploring what was actually true for us.
So we have to be willing to give up. And that story that we created was there for a reason. We use it to survive in many ways. I need to tell myself as a child that this is normal, that this is good. Often we're parroting the story that was told to us. And so parts of us have to be willing to let go. And that's hard. Sometimes the narrative is easier than the truth. So how do you help people in the book? I know this is what you're trying to do with the book. How do you help people move past that? Because sometimes it feels worse before it feels better.
Yes. The starting point, in my opinion, and this is what I tried to get across in the book, is that you need to write one or two of your stories out. Now, what do I mean by your stories? I don't mean an overarching, 25-minute telling of your life from 0 to 18. Like my parents got divorced when I was 7, and then we switched schools, and then we moved towns, and then this happened. I mean, you didn't make the basketball team. I want to hear that story. I want to hear when you saw the roster on the gym wall, your name was not on it. And what did that stir in your heart and body? And what was the interaction with your mother and father like when you told them? That's a story. That story will give me more access to how the neurons in your brain have been shaped than if you tell me a 30,000-foot view of your overarching life narrative. It's in the details on the ground that our hearts are formed.
I get what you're saying. We can have all the knowledge, we can give all the data, the fact points, but you're saying actually begin to notice those scraps, those shreds, those stories that are sticky, that stick around, even though you don't know why.
I love the word sticky. You remembered not making the team and you weren't sure why. And my guess is at some level you minimize the story as this shouldn't be a big deal. This shouldn't still be affecting me. Why do I still remember this? But at some point you found a new level of kindness and a new level of curiosity, and you gave that story weight, and something opened up for you in that space when you gave the story weight. And what my hope is for the listeners is that they would give their memories weight, even if they don't see how that story could possibly be a big deal.
You invite people to do this, to take this approach, not only with family of origin stories, but with spiritual stories, stories with God, cultural stories. Talk to us a little bit about that. What are some other categories for us to consider some of these stories that may be sort of a portal into deeper understanding and truth-telling?
Sure. You've named two already. Everybody has a story with regard to God. Even if you don't believe in God, there's a sense in which the cosmos has broken your heart or let you down or disappointed you. But for people who do believe in God, how do you come to terms with your unmet desires and your deep disappointment? Because at some level, God is the one who's implicated in those deep disappointments and unmet desires. And so the question is, will you wrestle with God honestly and candidly about the true feelings in your heart and body with regard to how your story has unfolded so far?
That's good. That's good. So there might even be, with the same story, there might be a relation back to parents. There might be also underneath that a relationship or a belief system or a disappointment that came in with the God attachment, with our attachment to God.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, anytime a boy or girl's heart is broken by heartache, by abuse, by trauma, the nature of the human heart is to make sense of that story in some way and then to resolve to live differently so that that bad thing never happens to me again. And very often those resolutions or those commitments or those vows or agreements are made about God, and they're made about how the world operates. And those become what we call our personality. Okay. So somebody says, I'm a diligent hard worker who doesn't trust anyone. I do it by myself. That's my personality. Okay. I'm not going to argue with the language, but it's far more accurate to say your heart was shattered as a child in a particular moment or moments, and you made sense of the world as I am alone and on my own. And if it is to be, I go to a gym here in Fort Collins and there's this big sign. If it is to be, it is up to me. Look, I get it for physical fitness. I get it. But sadly, many people go through life believing that's true about their life, that it is up to me. That is an incredibly lonely way of being in the world.
Yeah. One of the things I think about sometimes, Adam, and you provide so many practical ways in the book for people to begin to do this work. There's exercises, there's questions, there's so many ways into this work. It's so good. Tell me, one of the things I've noticed both in my work with clients and in my own life, and I'm curious about for you, you begin to tell the story, but something you're saying there, we have that need to be seen, to be mirrored, right? As we're talking about, when you're walking in the front door, you need a parent who sees you and says, "How was your day, Adam? You look a little down," right? When you haven't had that and you begin to realize that and you begin to tell the truth and you're now in adulthood, how do you replicate that? I know some of that is what we do as therapists. We provide some of that for our clients. I think we can begin to map that onto God. I'm curious, how do you, both in your personal life and in your practice when you're helping others, to me, that feels like an ongoing, how do you remind yourself, wait a minute, it's not all on me, because that's where that kind of comes from. There's like this almost Christ figure feeling, it's me out here to be there for the world. Oh, no, wait a minute. I can start to use my imagination to go, wait a minute, someone out there can see me and I can be small and held in that presence. But that takes a lot of mental work. I'm curious how you do that work in your own life and how you encourage others to do that work.
Sure. Neuroscientist Dan Siegel says that the greatest way to experience healing is by getting in as many relationships with a securely attached person as you can. Okay. And that's a brilliant comment. And what does he mean by that? He means that the way the human heart heals, the way the human nervous system heals, is by having healthy experiences of relationship. And by relationship, I mean navigating rupture and repair with other human beings and with God. So the most healing thing for me has been relationships, and that includes my therapeutic relationships. Like when I'm getting therapy, I've had those relationships and I have them still. But I have non-therapist relationships also where I experience and navigate rupture and repair. And that does more to heal the fragmented neural networks in my brain than anything else. Relationships. Why? Because we are created in the image of the relationship. We are so relational in our core. And the way the human heart heals is through relationship with God and relationship with human beings.
You talk about attachment a lot. A lot of what we're talking about here is secure attachments. How do you define and how do you experience a securely attached, a reparative relationship?
A securely attached relationship is when, like if you and I were securely attached to each other in relationship, we just met, but if we developed a relationship, here's how I would know. Whenever there was conflict between us, you would be able to bring your true feelings and experience to the dialogue. I would be able to bring mine, and we would both have an embodied sense of hopefulness that this will get repaired soon without you having to sacrifice your perspective or your individuality and without me having to sacrifice mine. What many people do is they either sacrifice their own truth, their own gut, their own experience. They ignore it, they dismiss it, they discount it. Why? Because they want relational connection with the other person.
Do you find, because through the process of healing, when you begin to tell the truth about your story, you begin to realize, and you talk about this so well in the book, that you conflate the comfort of that actually not securely attached relationship with your mother, but it felt comforting. You can map that onto adult relationships where, to use terms like codependency, where I can feel connected to someone that is not actually a secure relationship. And so I really want to, that I know this is the experience of a lot of listeners. So you're really saying something important here. It's when I'm abandoning myself to make you feel great, I might feel like, oh, I feel good in this relationship, when in fact, that is not healthy.
Right, because you are dismissing an important part of your heart, and you're doing it with some intentionality. I'm not blaming. I understand why. You're doing it because you are so relational, and this relationship matters to you, and you are picking up through your attunement to the other person that if you don't swallow your feelings, it will jeopardize the relational connection, and that feels unbearable to your heart.
And early on in the healing process, it can almost be like backwards day at school, relationships. I remember when I was dating my now husband, I was like, this is weird. I don't feel right. And it took me a long time to realize this is health, because we're not in that enmeshment where I'm picking up on his emotions and meeting them before he even realizes it. I'm expected to show up as an adult in this relationship. It didn't necessarily feel safe initially. It didn't feel unsafe. It felt safe. It didn't feel that same.
It didn't feel familiar.
That's right. That's the word. That's right.
And in the unfamiliarity, there was a disorientation in your body that you came to sort through as, oh, this is a healthy connection or a healthier connection than I am accustomed to experiencing. I'm not doing what my brain typically does in relationship, and it felt a little weird.
Yes. Did you go through that?
I have gone through that. I've had experiences
to
of that.
rewire sort of this is actually this healthy back and forth where someone is also attuning to me, where I'm showing up with my own, even sometimes negative emotions, is actually leading us to a better place because we're working through something. This is actually secure attachment versus that enmeshment.
Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenager's faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Adam, one of the things I love about your approach, both in the book and just as I hear you and listen to you, is you're a truth teller. You use this word intentionality. You don't want to remove accountability from anyone. And simultaneously, you are deeply kind and you emphasize the importance of kindness. How do you hold those two intentions? I think that's rare in this world.
I think the way you hold those two in tension is with the word honor. For me to honor you, Alison, is to tell you how I experience you. There's nothing more honoring to another person than the gift of being told how you experience them. So, for example, my daughter tells me frequently, how she experiences me, i.e. dad. So I'll never forget. She's 8 years old. She's furious at me. She's at the top of the stairs looking down, and she says, Dad, the rocket ship of not caring about me is blasting off, and you're driving it. Okay? Now, that is an 8-year-old girl who is willing to name intentionality and harm. She's expressing how she feels about how I just interacted with her without trepidation. She's just telling me like it is. That was honoring of me.
That is a brilliant example because that shows how safe you are.
That's right. That's right.
That she can tell you, Dad, this is my experience of you right now.
That's right.
And that you'll receive that. That's so interesting. So what you're saying there is she's telling the truth of her experience. She's not being mean. She's honoring the fact that you're somebody who she cares about enough to let you know this is what's going on.
Yes. And so for me to honor my father and mother is to tell the truth about my relationship with my father and mother. My parents are both dead now, but I did get to speak with my father before he died in a very honoring way about the ways that he harmed me. And how did that transpire? I called him up. Dad, would you be willing to have some conversations about some of the ways that I felt harmed by you as a boy? And to my astonishment, he said yes. And we began talking every Friday at 4 p.m. in 2009. It lasted 9 months. And I would share with him the stories of his harm of me. And we would talk it through. And he owned what he could own. It was incredibly healing. However, for many people, the idea of picking up the phone and saying to their mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad, hey, could we sit down to dinner and have a conversation about some of the ways I felt harmed by you? That would cause World War III in their family constellation.
And it might not be safe.
And it may not be safe. So not everyone can do that. But then the question is, how is it that your mother or father is unwilling to hear your heart? That is a devastating realization, whether you're 4 or 54.
And therefore, if you cannot do it with them, all the more that you have to find a place to tell the truth.
Yes. And if you cannot tell the truth to your parents, your nervous system is going to be shaped in such a way that you will be very reluctant to tell the truth to your spouse or your coworker or your boss or your best friend, because you have learned, your neurons have wired in response to your experience of telling the truth about, ouch, that hurt me, Dad, never goes well.
Yeah, it leads to breach. It leads to rupture with no repair, which is a void. So, Adam, this gets back to then what you said about the antidote to that. If you cannot find it with the people who hurt you, is to build up as many securely attached relationships where you can practice that muscle as possible.
Yes. And that's what, in a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller, it's what he calls the village. And he says in contemporary American society, the village is largely absent. What does he mean by the village? He means other elders, like warrior princes and princesses who have engaged their own story, suffered their own grief, and know how to use their power on behalf of the wounded. That's the village. And we are sadly often longing for one or two people that can be the village for us, and we don't know how to find them. And what you keep returning us to in this conversation is we need those people in our lives to heal. And you're absolutely right.
Kind of as we wind down here, one last question. You allude to this in the book. As we grow that muscle to be able to tell the truth about our stories, do you think it facilitates our ability to tell the truth about ourselves and face the truth about ourselves?
Oh, absolutely. Look, truth-telling is a holistic endeavor. The more truthful I am about how you, mother, have harmed me, the more truthful I can be about how I've harmed my son. The invitation is into the light of truth, 360 all the way around. So if I can tell the truth about my own failures as a father, as a husband, if I can tell the truth and own those without shame, but with integrity and honor for the other person, which means to repair, then why am I unwilling to tell the truth about the ways my heart has been harmed by others?
It's so good. It's because for many of us, it's easier to tell the truth about our own shortcomings than to tell the truth about how we've been harmed.
Way easier.
Right? And it just to listen to you say that. And I imagine even when your little girl says that to you, you have the capacity as a dad to hold that without shaming yourself. That then as a parent, you also have the ability when in the gentlest the way that God does with us, like God holds up that mirror of truth for us. You can also hold up that mirror of truth for others in that same way. And it's so freeing. It's so worth doing the hard work of facing your story and the things that we don't want to face. It's so worth it. I'm so grateful that for your voice, that you're talking about it and that you've brought this book into the world. Would you tell our listeners how they can find you? I think a lot of them already are listening to your podcast, but how they can find you and your work and your book and all the things that you're putting out there.
Sure. You can find me at adamyoungcounseling.com, or you can listen to the podcast that I host called The Place We Find Ourselves, which is on all podcast platforms. And then the book comes out March 4th, 2025. It's called Make Sense of Your Story, and you can pre-order it anywhere books are sold.
Adam, I want to close asking you a couple of questions I like to ask all my guests. What would you say to that younger version of you, that young boy showing up, worried about mom after school on the front doorstep? What would you say to him now?
Your heart for relationships is so good. Your heart for bringing goodness into this world is so holy.
And what is bringing out the best of you right now?
My marriage. Engaging with my wife. Engaging is a fancy word of saying fighting. Conflict. Listening. Refusing to misattune to her and refusing to ignore myself, which is to say, refusing to misattune to me. Bringing attunement to my heart, my perspective, my reality, and bringing attention to her perspective, her heart, and her reality. And then especially in the context of what is God mysteriously and playfully doing through our fights? That's bringing out the best of me.
Wow. That's a word. That's a whole nother podcast episode. I love that. Adam, you are bringing so much good into this world. This is a powerful book. It's impactful. It will make you think. It will make you consider your own story in new ways. I am so grateful that you're putting such goodness into the world. Thank you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alison. This was a delightful conversation.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.